On a breezy spring afternoon in Springfield, Jamal Washington was finishing his usual shift at the mall. He worked as a janitor, a tough job, but one he was proud of, especially since he was helping his family make ends meet. Life in Springfield wasn't easy. Opportunities were scarce, and while everyone knew each other in this small town, the camaraderie often came with a sense of shared struggle. Jamal was one of the few who kept his head down and worked hard, earning him a reputation as a responsible, polite young man. That afternoon, as he was about to wrap up his shift, Jamal noticed something unusual on a bench near the shopping center's main fountain. A wallet, sleek and well-crafted, with the kind of elegant stitching and leather finish he'd only seen in movies. Jamal's curiosity sparked, and he approached it, picking it up carefully. The wallet was surprisingly heavy. He glanced around, hoping to spot someone looking for it. But the mall was quiet, with most of the after-work crowd already gone. Jamal opened it, and his eyes widened. Inside was a substantial amount of cash, several platinum credit cards, and a driver's license bearing the name Mr. Henry Carver. Jamal immediately recognized the name. Mr. Carver was one of the wealthiest people in Springfield. He owned several businesses and was well known for his lavish lifestyle, something that always seemed slightly out of place in their modest town. Jamal stood there for a moment, torn. A part of him knew that he could use that money to help his family. Bills were piling up, and he'd been saving every spare dollar he earned. The cash in that wallet was more than he made in several months of work. He thought about his mother, who had always preached honesty to him, and his friends, who would probably say he'd be foolish not to pocket the cash. But Jamal knew he couldn't keep it. His conscience wouldn't allow it. With a deep breath, he decided to return the wallet to Mr. Carver himself. The next day, Jamal, dressed in his usual work clothes, headed toward Mr. Carver's grand mansion on the edge of town. The house was more like an estate, with high iron gates and a perfectly manicured lawn. Jamal felt a strange tension as he approached the door, clutching the wallet tightly. He rang the doorbell and waited, feeling slightly out of place. A butler opened the door, looking Jamal over with a mixture of suspicion and curiosity. "Can I help you?" the butler asked in a tone that suggested he didn't expect anything important. Jamal cleared his throat. "I found Mr. Carver's wallet at the mall yesterday. I wanted to return it to him personally." The butler's expression changed, and he looked impressed, perhaps even surprised. He invited Jamal in, and after a few moments, Mr. Carver himself appeared, dressed in a designer suit. Carver looked at Jamal, then at the wallet in his hand, and a flicker of recognition crossed his face. He took the wallet, rifling through it to confirm everything was still there, particularly the USB drive tucked away in a small, hidden pocket. Mr. Carver's reaction was subtle but noticeable, an odd tension as he glanced at Jamal. "Thank you," Mr. Carver said, his voice calm yet strained. "Most people wouldn't have been as honest as you." Jamal felt a surge of pride at the compliment, but noticed something odd in Mr. Carver's reaction, a glint in his eye that hinted at more than just gratitude. Before he left, Mr. Carver's assistant called him aside, expressing her own gratitude and pressing an envelope into his hand. "Mr. Carver insists," she said. Jamal didn't open it until he was back home. Inside, to his astonishment, was a substantial sum of money, a reward larger than anything he had ever earned. Word spread quickly. Springfield was a small town, and news of Jamal's honesty reached every corner. People stopped him on the street, congratulating him, praising him for his integrity. His friends, however, weren't as enthusiastic. They teased him, saying he should have kept the cash from the wallet itself, not just the reward, hinting that he'd missed out on an opportunity. Others were more skeptical, wondering aloud why a man as rich as Mr. Carver would give away so much money for a simple wallet return. Some rumors suggested there was something important about that wallet, something more than just cash or credit cards. Jamal shrugged it off, unwilling to let the gossip spoil the pride he felt. That night, though, as Jamal walked home, he felt a prickling sensation on the back of his neck. A car he didn't recognize had been parked near his house since the evening, and he noticed it again on his way to work the following day. Each time he glanced back, it was there, always a few car lengths behind him. Never close enough to be obvious, but never far enough to be inconspicuous. He tried to shake off the feeling, dismissing it as paranoia. Yet he couldn't ignore the sense that he was being watched. On his third day of noticing the same car, Jamal started feeling a real sense of unease. He told his mother, who advised him to ignore it, saying it was likely a coincidence. But as the day went on, he became increasingly certain that someone was indeed following him. It was a strange feeling, one that made him wonder if returning the wallet was the best decision. Why would anyone be interested in following him over something so trivial? He hadn't even looked too closely at the contents, other than to confirm it was Mr. Carver's. Jamal's concerns grew when he noticed people around him behaving differently. Some acquaintances seemed distant, while others offered him nervous smiles. It was as if his entire community was treating him differently, as though they knew something he didn't. He began questioning everything, replaying every moment of the encounter with Mr. Carver, trying to piece together what he might have missed. Then, on a chilly evening as he was heading home, Jamal's world took an even stranger turn. He had just reached his front porch when two dark-suited men appeared out of nowhere. They were serious, their expressions unreadable, and they flashed FBI badges with an air of formality that instantly turned Jamal's stomach. One of the agents stepped forward, his gaze sharp and piercing. "Are you Jamal Washington?" he asked. Jamal nodded, heart pounding. He had no idea what the FBI could possibly want with him. The agent cleared his throat and looked him in the eye. "We need to talk about the wallet you returned to Mr. Henry Carver." Jamal felt his blood run cold. Jamal stood frozen on his porch, his mind racing as he tried to process the presence of the two FBI agents standing before him. The agent in front, a stern-looking man with a close-cropped haircut, repeated his question. "Can we come inside, Jamal? This is a matter of some urgency." Numbly, Jamal stepped back and held the door open, his heart pounding as the agents entered his modest living room. He closed the door, suddenly hyper-aware of his surroundings. The worn couch where his family watched movies, the slightly faded wallpaper, and the family photos that adorned the walls. All of it felt surreal under the intense scrutiny of the agents. The second agent, a woman with an observant but calm demeanor, looked around the room before sitting down across from Jamal. She nodded toward the couch, and Jamal took a seat, barely able to meet their eyes. The first agent remained standing, his arms crossed, his expression unreadable. For a few tense moments, no one spoke, and Jamal's mind filled with 1,000 questions. Why were they here? What did they want with him? And more importantly, what did it have to do with Mr. Carver's wallet? The female agent finally broke the silence, her voice measured and even. "Jamal, we're here to ask about a recent incident involving a wallet you found and returned to a man named Henry Carver. Do you remember that?" Jamal nodded quickly, his voice barely a whisper. "Yes, ma'am. I found it at the shopping center. It had some cash, credit cards, and a driver's license with his name on it. I thought it would be the right thing to return it." He swallowed, noticing how both agents exchanged a quick look at the mention of the driver's license. "Jamal," the male agent began, his tone sharp and authoritative, "did you happen to notice anything unusual about the wallet? Anything that seemed out of place?" Jamal hesitated, suddenly recalling the sleek, unmarked USB drive he'd seen tucked away in one of the wallet's hidden compartments. It was unusual, sure, but he hadn't thought much of it at the time. After all, it wasn't like he knew Mr. Carver personally or understood his habits. "Well, there was this small USB drive. I don't know why it was there, but I didn't touch it or anything. I just gave the wallet back as it was," he replied, hoping this answer would satisfy their question. The female agent leaned forward, her eyes narrowing slightly. "Jamal, that USB drive contained highly sensitive information Information that ties Mr. Carver to a larger investigation we've been working on for months. By returning that wallet, you've inadvertently inserted yourself into a highly delicate and, quite frankly, dangerous situation. Jamal's eyes widened, a chill running down his spine. Dangerous? I don't understand. All I did was give back what wasn't mine. I didn't look at anything, I swear. The male agent sighed, his tone softening just slightly. We understand that, Jamal. And for that reason, you're not in any trouble. But you need to understand that Mr. Carver is not the upstanding businessman he appears to be. He's been under investigation for some time due to his connections with illegal activities, including money laundering and organized crime. The information on that drive could implicate him in several high-profile cases we're pursuing. Jamal sat there, his mind reeling as he tried to process what they were telling him. This was Henry Carver they were talking about, the wealthy, charming man who lived in the grand mansion on the hill, who threw charity events and was praised as a community pillar. It didn't make sense. Yet, as he thought back to the encounter, he remembered Mr. Carver's reaction when he handed over the wallet. The strange flicker of something other than gratitude in his eyes, as though he were weighing Jamal, calculating something he didn't fully understand at the time. The female agent continued, breaking into his thoughts. This is a complicated situation, Jamal. Your honesty and integrity are commendable, but your actions have unintentionally brought you into the orbit of some very dangerous individuals. There's a chance that Mr. Carver or his associates may perceive your involvement as a threat. They might wonder what you know or suspect what you've told us. That's why we're here, to make sure you're protected and to discuss how you can help us in return for our assistance. Jamal's pulse quickened as he realized the gravity of their words. It wasn't just about a lost wallet or a USB drive anymore. He was now in the crosshairs of something far beyond his control. Protected? He echoed, his voice faint. You mean, you think they'd come after me? The male agent nodded grimly. It's possible, yes. People like Mr. Carver don't leave loose ends, Jamal. They'd rather not take chances. If they suspect you know anything about what's on that drive, they won't hesitate to remove you from the equation. Jamal's stomach dropped. The reality of the situation settled over him like a weight, pressing down on him, making it hard to breathe. He'd been trying to do the right thing, trying to be the kind of man his mother had raised him to be. But now, because of that choice, he was in danger. He felt a surge of anger, frustration bubbling up as he realized how absurd this all was. All he had wanted was to do a good deed, to return something that didn't belong to him. Now he was caught in a deadly game he hadn't even known existed. What do you want me to do? He asked quietly, his voice barely above a whisper. The female agent's face softened, and she leaned forward, her tone gentle yet firm. Jamal, we want you to help us by keeping an eye on Mr. Carver. You don't need to do anything drastic. Just keep your routine. But if you notice anything suspicious or hear anything unusual, we want you to report it to us immediately. In return, we'll make sure you and your family are protected. And if things get too risky, we have witness protection measures we can put in place. Jamal felt trapped. He didn't want to be involved in any of this, didn't want to risk his life or the safety of his family. But he also knew that turning a blind eye to what he now understood would be impossible. The agents had given him just enough information to make him realize that this wasn't a situation he could walk away from. I'll do it, he finally said, his voice barely more than a murmur. The agents exchanged a quick look of approval, and the male agent reached into his jacket pocket, pulling out a small, unassuming business card. If anything happens, anything at all, call us. And Jamal, be careful. People like Mr. Carver have ways of finding things out, and they won't hesitate to silence anyone they see as a threat. With that final warning, the agents left, leaving Jamal alone in his living room, still struggling to comprehend what had just happened. He sat there for a long time, staring at the card in his hand, replaying every word they'd said in his mind. The idea that someone might come after him for something as simple as returning a wallet felt surreal, like something out of a bad movie. But he knew now that this was his reality, and he couldn't ignore it. As the days passed, Jamal did his best to go about his life as usual, though he found it increasingly difficult to maintain a sense of normalcy. He started noticing more unfamiliar cars around his neighborhood, shadows lurking just beyond his line of sight. His friends sensed something was off, asking if he was okay, but he brushed off their concerns, too afraid to tell them the truth. He didn't want to drag anyone else into this mess. One evening, as he was closing up at the shopping center, Jamal noticed a man watching him from across the parking lot. The man's gaze was steady, intense, and when Jamal glanced in his direction, the man quickly looked away, disappearing into the crowd. Jamal felt his heart race, a cold sweat breaking out on his forehead. He realized then that the agents were right. Mr. Carver's people were watching him, waiting for any sign that he might be a threat. The thought was terrifying, yet as he walked home, Jamal felt a strange sense of resolve settling over him. He had stumbled into something he hadn't asked for, but now that he was here, he knew he couldn't back down. His life had taken an unexpected turn, one that would test his courage, his loyalty, and his principles in ways he could never have imagined. As the weeks passed, Jamal's life became a delicate balancing act, his every move shadowed by a sense of unease. He felt trapped between his familiar, modest life and a world of intrigue that he had never wanted to enter. He was constantly on edge, checking over his shoulder for strangers, scrutinizing every car parked on his street, and lying awake at night, his thoughts spiraling into paranoia. He couldn't shake the feeling that someone was always watching him, waiting for him to slip up, to reveal a weakness. Then, one evening, just as he thought he might be able to settle back into a semblance of normalcy, it happened. There was a knock at his door, urgent and insistent. His heart jumped. He had barely opened the door when he was face to face with two men, tall, intimidating, and clearly not here for a friendly visit. Jamal knew immediately that they weren't FBI agents. The men had an air of quiet menace, the kind that doesn't need to raise its voice to make a threat. The man in front, with a scar running down his cheek, gave him a thin smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Evening, Jamal," the scared man said, his voice like gravel. "Mind if we come in? We got some business to discuss." Jamal's throat went dry, but he forced himself to keep his voice steady. "I'm not interested in any business," he replied, gripping the edge of the door tightly. "Maybe you've got the wrong house." The scared man laughed, a sound that was anything but friendly. "Oh, we've got the right house, and we know exactly who you are, Jamal. Mr. Carver sends his regards. He's got a few concerns about that wallet you found." Jamal's mind raced. The FBI had warned him that Carver might send people to check up on him, but he hadn't expected them to show up at his front door, unannounced and so bold. He wanted to slam the door in their faces, but he knew that might make things worse. So he stood his ground, trying to project a calm confidence he didn't feel. "I already returned the wallet," Jamal said, his voice firmer than he expected. "I don't know what more you could want from me." The man's smile faded, replaced by a cold, calculating look. "You see, Mr. Carver is a careful man. He likes to make sure that people know how to keep their mouths shut, especially when it comes to certain sensitive matters. So here's the deal, Jamal. Mr. Carver wants you to confirm that you've forgotten everything about that wallet. Whatever you saw or didn't see, you're gonna keep it that way, for your own good." Jamal could feel his pulse hammering in his throat. He forced himself to nod, keeping his face blank. "I don't know anything," he said quietly. "I didn't look at anything in the wallet. I just returned it. That's all." The man scrutinized him, searching his face for any hint of deceit. After a long, tense moment, he seemed satisfied and nodded. "Good," he said, though there was a lingering threat in his voice. "Because if we find out otherwise, or if you start talking to the wrong people, we'll be back." And trust me, that'll be a conversation you don't want to have." With that, the two men turned and left, leaving Jamal standing in his doorway, his body shaking as the adrenaline flooded through him. He closed the door and leaned against it, feeling as though the walls were closing in around him. He had done nothing wrong, just returned a wallet. But now he was caught in a web of threats, surveillance, and paranoia. The next day, the tension only grew. He knew he had to contact the FBI agents, but he also feared that doing so might put him in even greater danger. Nevertheless, he took a deep breath, found the card they'd left him, and dialed the number. The agent picked up on the second ring. "Agent Turner," came the familiar voice, calm and professional. "It's Jamal," he said, trying to keep his voice steady. "Two of Carver's guys showed up at my house last night. They threatened me. Said I needed to keep quiet about everything." Agent Turner's voice remained calm, but Jamal could detect an undertone of urgency. "Jamal, thank you for letting us know. This is exactly what we were worried about. Carver's associates don't take kindly to loose ends, and they see you as a potential threat. We're moving you into protection immediately." Jamal's stomach sank. He knew what protection meant. It meant leaving his family, his home, and everything familiar behind, all because he'd done the right thing. "Isn't there any other way?" he asked, desperation creeping into his voice. "Can't you just, I don't know, get Carver arrested or something?" Agent Turner sighed, sounding almost sympathetic. "Believe me, Jamal, we're working on it. But these things take time, and right now we need to prioritize your safety. The people Carver works with, they're dangerous. They don't hesitate to eliminate anyone they see as a liability." Jamal didn't have a choice. Reluctantly, he agreed to the plan, and within hours, he found himself packing a small bag, saying goodbye to his family under the guise of going away for work, and meeting Agent Turner at an undisclosed location. He was quickly taken to a safe house on the outskirts of town, far away from the prying eyes of Carver's associates. Life in the safe house was isolating, and Jamal found himself slipping into a routine of quiet days and restless nights. He had no contact with anyone from his old life, and was unable to leave for fear of being followed. The solitude was overwhelming, and he often found himself staring out the window, wondering how he had ended up in this situation. He had only wanted to do the right thing, yet here he was, hiding, his life turned upside down. One evening, as he was preparing a meager dinner, Agent Turner visited the safe house with an unexpected update. "We've got something," Turner said, his expression a mixture of caution and excitement. "We think we may have enough evidence to bring Carver in, but we need one final piece to make the case airtight." Jamal's heart sank. He knew what Turner was going to say before he even said it. "We need you to testify, Jamal. Your first-hand account of finding that USB drive and the men who confronted you. It could be the nail in the coffin for Carver, but it also means exposing yourself." Jamal stared at him, his thoughts spinning. Testifying meant putting himself out there, becoming the face of the case against Carver. It would mean risking everything, facing down Carver's lawyers, his associates, and potentially putting a target on his back. But he also knew that this might be the only way to truly end the nightmare that had consumed his life. Taking a deep breath, Jamal nodded. "I'll do it. I'll testify." Agent Turner gave him a small, respectful nod. "I knew we could count on you, Jamal. This won't be easy, but you're doing the right thing." The weeks leading up to the trial were grueling. Jamal was questioned repeatedly, his story dissected and examined from every angle. He spent sleepless nights going over his testimony, knowing that every detail had to be perfect. The pressure was immense, but he knew that his testimony was vital to bringing Carver to justice. Finally, the day of the trial arrived. Jamal was escorted to the courthouse under heavy security, his every move watched by the agents who had sworn to protect him. He took the stand, his heart racing as he looked out over the courtroom, feeling the weight of countless eyes on him. In the front row sat Carver, his face expressionless but his eyes cold and unblinking, a silent reminder of the power he held. As Jamal recounted his story, the night he found the wallet, the USB drive, the men who had confronted him, he could feel the tension in the room building. He told the truth, every detail, every threat, every moment of fear he'd endured since that fateful day. When he finished, the courtroom was silent, the weight of his words hanging heavy in the air. The trial was long and exhausting, with Carver's defense team doing everything they could to discredit him. They painted him as an opportunist, suggested that he had tampered with the wallet, and even implied that he was lying about the threats he'd received. But Jamal stood his ground, answering each question with unwavering honesty. In the end, his courage paid off. The evidence was overwhelming, and with Jamal's testimony, the jury had no choice but to find Carver guilty. As the verdict was read, Jamal felt an overwhelming surge of relief and pride. He had faced his fears, stood up to one of the most powerful men in the city, and emerged victorious. But the victory came with a cost. Jamal knew that his life would never be the same. He couldn't go back to his old life, couldn't return to the quiet existence he'd once known. But as he left the courthouse, escorted by the agents who had become his allies, he felt a sense of peace. He had done the right thing, despite the risks, and in the process, he had found a strength within himself that he hadn't known existed. In the days that followed, Jamal's stories spread throughout Springfield. The aftermath of the trial was both a whirlwind and a storm. Jamal had hoped that exposing Mr. Carver would bring a sense of closure, but instead, he found himself at the center of a community torn in two. Some residents hailed him as a hero, a young man who had risked everything to bring justice to light. Others, however, were less charitable. Rumors spread, whispers that he had betrayed one of the town's most respected figures, that he was just looking for attention or an easy way out of his difficult life. Carver's influence had long seeped into Springfield's culture, and many people, especially those connected to Carver's businesses, resented the damage Jamal's testimony had done to their livelihoods. To them, he wasn't a hero, he was a threat. Back home, the pressure mounted. Jamal's family, who had always stood by him, now felt the brunt of the community's anger and suspicion. His mother had to change her routine, avoiding certain local stores where once friendly faces now turned away or whispered behind her back. His younger siblings came home from school with stories of classmates whose parents had told them to steer clear of the Washington boy. It was an invisible weight that pressed down on them every day, straining family bonds and making every trip outside feel like walking into enemy territory. For Jamal, this reaction was a crushing disappointment. He had thought the trial would bring peace, a sense of justice, maybe even an opportunity to start fresh. But the backlash left him isolated and exhausted. His old friends were hesitant to speak to him, either out of fear of Carver's supporters or because they believed some of the rumors themselves. Springfield, the town he had grown up in, felt foreign and hostile, and his sense of belonging had evaporated. In the midst of this turmoil, the FBI agents who had initially promised protection returned with troubling news. They informed Jamal that despite the conviction, certain associates of Carver's were still at large. The conviction had disrupted their operations, but it hadn't dismantled them entirely. The agents had credible information that some of Carver's closest allies had vowed to take revenge, blaming Jamal for their setbacks and the downfall of their leader. The threat wasn't just in whispers or dirty looks. Jamal's life was once again at risk. This realization shattered any remaining hope he'd had of regaining a normal life in Springfield. The agents recommended that he enter a federal witness protection program, explaining that without it, his chances of staying safe were slim. Jamal's heart sank. He knew what this meant. He would have to leave Springfield, leave his family, his few remaining friends, and every familiar street and memory behind. Witness protection wasn't a temporary arrangement. It was a permanent, life-altering decision. The agents tried to reassure him, emphasizing that it would allow him a new start, a chance to live without looking over his shoulder every day. But to Jamal, it felt like another punishment, a price he hadn't expected to pay for doing the right thing. He resisted the idea at first, clinging to the hope that he could rebuild his life on his own terms. But his family's well-being weighed heavily on him. If he stayed, his presence would continue to bring them unwanted attention and danger. Reluctantly, he agreed to enter the program. Saying goodbye to his family was the hardest thing he'd ever done. His mother held him tightly, tears in her eyes, whispering that she was proud of him, no matter what anyone else said. His siblings, too young to fully understand the gravity of the situation, clung to him, begging him not to leave. As he left his house for the last time, he promised himself that he would keep in touch with them, even if it had to be through letters written under an assumed name, sent from places they would never visit. Once in the program, Jamal was given a new identity and relocated to a city hundreds of miles away. He found himself in a small, quiet apartment, stripped of any personal history, his belongings reduced to essentials, and the few keepsakes he'd managed to smuggle in. He was instructed to avoid forming close connections, to live discreetly, and to avoid using social media or any other platform that might make him traceable. Every time he left his apartment, he had to remind himself to keep a low profile, to avoid attracting attention. It was a lonely, isolating existence, far removed from the life he had known. Days turned into weeks, and the monotony weighed on him. Jamal threw himself into a routine of simple tasks to distract himself from the sense of loss and the bitter resentment that had begun to fester. The excitement of a new beginning faded quickly, replaced by the realization that he was, in many ways, a prisoner of his own decisions. He couldn't find peace, haunted by the memories of Springfield, of his family, of the people who had turned their backs on him. At night, he lay awake, thinking about Carver's words, the cold, dismissive stares from his former neighbors, and the empty promises of justice that now felt like hollow victories. But over time, as the months passed, Jamal began to find moments of clarity amid the struggle. He started volunteering at a local community center, helping underprivileged kids with their homework, finding a kind of quiet satisfaction in giving back. And as he walked away from the mailbox that day, he felt something lift within him, a sense that, despite everything, he was finally at peace. The question lingered in his mind as he returned to his apartment that night. Would anyone else have done what he did? Would they have the strength to stand up for what was right, knowing the cost? He hoped his story would inspire someone, somewhere, to believe that they could. Jamal's days in his new life unfolded with a steady rhythm, a kind of reluctant acceptance settling over him. Each morning, he woke to the same small apartment, the same view of unfamiliar streets, and the same emptiness where Springfield's memories used to reside. His life felt stripped of color, isolated by the quiet walls of his witness protection identity. Yet, as much as he missed his family, as much as he felt exiled, he also knew that he was alive. And that was something he couldn't take for granted. Months turned into a year, and then another. Jamal built a modest existence for himself, working odd jobs in the city and volunteering whenever he could at the community center. Over time, the people at the center became his second family, a kind of surrogate network of support. The kids he helped began to look up to him, asking for advice not only on schoolwork but on life, trusting him with questions and struggles they might not share with anyone else. In the small triumphs of these children, Jamal found a renewed sense of purpose. He was reminded that his life could still have meaning, even if it wasn't the life he had originally envisioned. One day, as he was leaving the community center, he spotted a familiar face, Agent Turner, the FBI agent who had shepherded him through his testimony against Carver and helped him transition into witness protection. It had been over 2 years since the trial, and seeing Turner brought a flood of memories and a twinge of unease. Jamal knew that Turner's presence could only mean one thing: something was changing. They found a quiet corner in a nearby park to sit and talk, away from prying eyes. Turner looked tired, his expression lined with the weight of countless cases and endless travels. "Jamal," he began, his voice calm but grave. "I know you've been trying to adjust to this life. And you've done well, especially under these circumstances. But we have news that could change everything." Jamal's heart quickened, the faint glimmer of hope mingling with dread. He was tired of running, tired of living in limbo. But he didn't dare let himself believe that he could return to Springfield, to his family and friends, without repercussions. "What is it?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Carver's remaining associates have either been apprehended or have gone underground. We've successfully dismantled the network, and the threat level is, well, we believe it's low enough now that we can consider reintroducing you to your former life, should you choose to do so. You'd still need to be cautious, but you wouldn't be under the same level of surveillance." Jamal's mind reeled, grappling with the magnitude of Turner's words. The chance to return to Springfield, to be himself again, felt like a dream, almost too good to be true. But he knew there was more. There had to be a catch. Turner continued, sensing Jamal's hesitance. "You'd have the option to come back. But understand this. Not everyone in Springfield has forgotten what happened. Some people still blame you for the fallout from Carver's downfall. And then there's your family. They're doing well, but they've had to adjust without you. Going back might be harder than staying away." Jamal nodded slowly, absorbing the implications. He thought of his mother, who had struggled without him, raising his siblings in a town that had turned cold and suspicious. He remembered the way his friends had distanced themselves, how some of them had taken Carver's side, even after the truth came out. Returning would mean facing that, confronting a community that might still harbor resentment, and risking the fragile peace he had managed to cultivate in his new life. For the next few days, Jamal was restless, wrestling with the choice that lay before him. Part of him longed to see his family, to reconnect with the life he had left behind. But he also feared the backlash, the judgments, and the potential danger that might still linger in the shadows. He had fought so hard to build something meaningful here, and he didn't know if he could bear the pain of rejection if he returned to Springfield and found that his sacrifice had been forgotten, or worse, dismissed. One evening, he sat down with a piece of paper, intent on listing the pros and cons. But as he stared at the blank page, he realized that he was asking the wrong question. It wasn't about which life would be easier. It was about which life would allow him to live without regret. He remembered the kids at the community center, the way their eyes lit up when he helped them, the sense of purpose he felt when he saw them succeed. They reminded him of the innocence he had lost, of the promise he had made to himself to live a life that mattered. In the end, Jamal made his choice. He called Agent Turner, thanking him for the offer, but explaining that he had found a new home, a new mission. He couldn't abandon the life he had built, the connections he had made, or the commitment he had developed toward helping others. Turner respected his decision, and though there was a hint of sadness in his voice, he expressed his admiration for Jamal's resolve. Jamal's life continued, rooted now in purpose rather than place. He became a fixture at the community center, eventually taking on a full-time role as a mentor and program coordinator. He dedicated himself to creating opportunities for kids who had few, providing them with the support he wished he'd had when he was their age. His story became something of a legend among the children, a tale of courage, sacrifice, and integrity. But he never shared all the details, letting the myth grow naturally, preferring to keep the most painful parts to himself. One day, years after his testimony against Carver, a young girl at the center came to him with a question that struck him deeply. "Mr. G," she asked, her voice small but determined, "why do you always help people, even when it's hard?" Jamal smiled, feeling the weight of his past, mingling with the promise of the present. He took a moment to answer, choosing his words carefully. Because sometimes we have to do what's right, even if it costs us something. We have to be the people we want others to be, even when it's tough. And if we don't help each other, then we forget what it means to be human. The girl nodded, absorbing his words with a seriousness beyond her years. She smiled, then hugged him, her small arms wrapping around his shoulders in a gesture of pure gratitude. In that moment, Jamal felt something shift within him, a sense of peace, of fulfillment, of having found his place in the world. Life went on, and Springfield became a distant memory, a chapter that had taught him more than he had ever wanted to learn. He still thought of his family, writing letters that he never sent, and wondering if they would ever truly understand the choices he had made. He had sacrificed one life for another, but he had found his own form of redemption, a purpose that allowed him to sleep at night, knowing he had done the right thing. As the years passed, Jamal's story spread quietly through his new community. People admired him for his strength, his dedication, and his kindness. He became a mentor to countless young people, teaching them about resilience, honesty, and courage. And though he never sought recognition, he became a symbol of quiet heroism, a reminder that sometimes the most ordinary acts of kindness can lead to the most extraordinary lives. In the end, Jamal realized that the life he had built was more than just a second chance. It was the life he was meant to live. And while he would always carry the scars of his past, he wore them with pride, knowing they had shaped him into the man he had become. He had taken a stand, faced the darkness, and emerged stronger. And though he had lost much along the way, he had gained something far more valuable, a life filled with purpose, meaning, and the quiet satisfaction of knowing he had made a difference. His journey had been painful and at times lonely, but it had also been a journey of growth, transformation, and profound courage. And as he watched the children he mentored grow up, knowing they would carry a part of his story with them, he felt a sense of contentment he hadn't known was possible. He had found his home, not in a place, but in the lives he touched, the hearts he helped to heal, and the legacy he left behind. And in that quiet, unspoken way, Jamal's story became a testament to the power of resilience, integrity, and love. It was a story that would be told long after he was gone, a reminder that even in the face of darkness, one act of kindness could light the way for generations to come. Years passed, and Jamal's life settled into a rhythm that was both fulfilling and humble, marked by the steady, quiet work he did at the community center. The children he mentored grew up, some moving on to college, others finding jobs and starting families. They would come back to visit him, thanking him for the guidance he had provided, the unwavering support he had shown them when no one else did. For Jamal, these moments were worth more than any recognition or reward. He had built a legacy, not of wealth or power, but of kindness, strength, and resilience. He had become a father figure to many, a trusted guide, and a symbol of integrity and perseverance. Despite the peace he found in this life, memories of Springfield would drift back to him now and then, as fleeting as shadows yet as vivid as the day he'd left. He thought about his family, wondering how they had fared, if they ever thought of him, or if they had moved on, creating new lives untouched by his absence. He considered reaching out from time to time, but he held back, reluctant to disrupt the life he had built. He didn't want to reopen old wounds, nor did he want to risk rekindling connections that might lead back to those few remaining threats. Carver's shadow might have faded, but Jamal knew that he couldn't fully erase the man's influence from his past. One rainy evening, however, everything changed. Jamal was closing up the community center after a late meeting with staff, making sure the doors were locked and the lights turned off, when he noticed a familiar figure standing outside, partially obscured by the downpour. At first, he thought he was imagining things, but as he looked closer, his heart skipped a beat. Standing there, drenched from the rain yet unmistakable, was his younger brother, Malik. Jamal felt a rush of emotions, surprise, fear, hope, all colliding in a way that left him breathless. He opened the door, calling Malik's name, barely able to believe what he was seeing. Malik looked up, a hesitant smile breaking through his drenched, weary expression. "Hey, big bro," he said, his voice shaky yet filled with a warmth Jamal hadn't heard in years. Jamal ushered Malik inside, quickly grabbing a towel from the storage closet and handing it to him. As Malik dried off, Jamal tried to process what was happening, his mind racing with questions. How had Malik found him? Why was he here? And most pressing, was it safe? Once Malik was settled, Jamal couldn't hold back any longer. How? How did you find me? I thought it was better if we didn't. Malik looked at him with a mix of sadness and determination. I had to find you, Jamal. I needed to see you, to understand. We've all missed you so much. Mom talks about you all the time, you know. She tells everyone you're doing good work somewhere, that you're safe. But I couldn't keep living without knowing the truth. I had to know if you were okay, if you were happy. Jamal's heart ached at the thought of his family, of the years he'd lost with them, the milestones he'd missed. He reached out, placing a hand on Malik's shoulder. I am, Malik. I am okay. But it's complicated. Everything that happened, it wasn't safe for any of you if I stayed. I made this choice because I wanted you all to have a life free from the shadows I had to leave behind. Malik nodded, understanding the weight of his brother's words. I know, Jamal, and I respect that. But I want you to know that no matter what, we've always been proud of you. What you did, standing up against Carver, taking a stand like that, it's something none of us will ever forget. You did what was right, even if it meant losing everything. And that's something worth honoring. Jamal felt a surge of emotion, tears prickling at the corners of his eyes. For years, he had carried the weight of his choices, the isolation, the loneliness, believing that his family had moved on or perhaps even resented him. But hearing Malik's words, knowing that they were proud of him, lifted a burden he hadn't realized he was still carrying. They talked for hours, catching up on everything Jamal had missed, the births of new nieces and nephews, family gatherings, birthdays, and holidays. Malik told him stories of Springfield, how the town had changed, how people still remembered him, some with respect and others with resentment. Carver's influence had waned over the years, but the scars he left on the community remained. Despite the darkness he'd left behind, Jamal's story had lingered, becoming a symbol of courage and sacrifice, especially for the younger generation. As the night wore on, Malik grew quiet, looking down at his hands as he spoke. Jamal, I came here to ask you something important. Mom's not getting any younger. She misses you. We all do. I know you've built a new life here, that you've made peace with things, but would you ever consider coming back, even if it's just a visit? The question hung in the air, heavy with unspoken possibilities and risks. Jamal's heart ached at the thought of seeing his mother again, of returning to the place he had once called home. But he also knew that his past was a delicate web, one that could unravel with even the slightest misstep. Yet, looking into Malik's hopeful eyes, Jamal felt a pull he couldn't ignore, a yearning he'd buried for years. After a long silence, he finally spoke, his voice steady yet filled with emotion. I don't know, Malik. I want to, more than anything, but it's not just about me. It's about keeping everyone safe. If there's even a chance that going back could put any of you at risk, I don't know if I could forgive myself. Malik reached across the table, placing a hand on his brother's. We're stronger than you think, Jamal. You taught us that. You showed us what it means to stand up, to be brave. Maybe it's time we face this together. Jamal considered his brother's words, feeling a glimmer of hope, a sense of possibility he hadn't allowed himself to feel in years. They sat in silence for a while, each lost in thought, the weight of their shared past settling around them like a protective shield. Finally, Jamal nodded, a tentative smile breaking through. Maybe one day, when the time is right. Malik accepted this answer, understanding that Jamal's journey was still unfolding, that his return would be on his own terms, when he was ready. As they said their goodbyes, Jamal felt a renewed sense of purpose, a quiet strength that had been rekindled by his brother's visit. Malik left with the promise to keep in touch, to keep their mother's hope alive that one day Jamal might return, if only for a brief reunion. Over the following weeks, Jamal found himself reflecting deeply on his life, his choices, and the legacy he was building. His work at the community center took on new meaning, each interaction a testament to the journey that had brought him here. The children he mentored grew into young adults, carrying with them the lessons he had taught them, embodying the resilience he had fought so hard to uphold. One evening, as he walked home from the center, Jamal paused, looking up at the night sky. He thought of Springfield, of his family, of the life he had left behind and the life he had found. In that moment, he felt an overwhelming sense of peace. He had spent years running, hiding, and sacrificing, but he had also grown, healed, and transformed. He had found a new home, a new family, and a new purpose, and he had become the man he had always hoped to be. As he stood there, a quiet thought settled in his mind, a sense of closure and acceptance. He didn't need to return to Springfield to find his place in the world. His journey had brought him to exactly where he was meant to be, and he knew that, in his own way, he had finally come home. Jamal walked on, carrying with him the lessons of his past, the strength of his family's love, and the legacy of courage he had built one small act of kindness at a time. His story, once marked by hardship and sacrifice, had transformed into a tale of resilience, hope, and quiet heroism. A story that would live on, not just in Springfield, but in the lives he had touched and the hearts he had helped heal. And as he disappeared into the night, a part of him felt whole, at peace with all that had been and all that was yet to come, leaving behind a legacy of light that would guide others long after he was gone.